Yes, you read that title correctly. I'm calling Darksiders 2 the perfect sequel. Let me tell you why. Now, for those that don't know, the Darksiders video games were originally made by Vigil Games, a studio under the now defunct publisher THQ. Fast forward a few years later, and a company called Nordic purchased the rights to the Darksiders series, now called THQ Nordic. It kind of sounds like THQ just downsized while declaring bankruptcy or something. Regardless, the games were then being made once again. Each main numbered title follows the adventures of a single horseman of the apocalypse. That's right, you play as one of the very riders themselves in each of the games. Darksiders 1 had you taking control of War, and now Darksiders 2 puts you in the shoes of his brother, Death. While Fury was the one you played as in Darksiders 3, that's in the second era of Darksiders, after THQ went bankrupt. For now, Darksiders 2 takes place during the end of THQ's lifespan. Hopes were high that the game was going to do well, but since the late publisher ended up still going under, it clearly wasn't enough. So if this game didn't end up saving THQ, why am I calling it a perfect sequel? I'm glad you asked, because Darksiders 2 follows up the first game extremely well. Not only in what the first game introduced, but also with added features and mechanics while expanding the Darksiders universe as a whole. Let's look at that point for a second, give you a little summary of what happened. The universe of Darksiders takes place during the modern era of civilization. The opening cutscene in Darksiders 1 shows a city that looks very similar to New York City or something of that nature. The only difference being that this very cutscene takes place during the apocalypse itself. Demons and angels are fighting each other while entering Earth's atmosphere looking like meteors. Humanity is falling victim to this conflict going on between the two opposing forces and stand no chance of survival. I mean, it is the apocalypse after all. Continuing on, you see that only one of the four horsemen are there too. War. There to do his job as he was called down to keep the balance in check for something called the Charred Council. Something goes wrong and War gets weaker and weaker until he's defeated in combat. Sent back to the Charred Council, War finds out that while he heard the call, apparently all 7 of the seals to the apocalypse were not broken. All 7 of the seals need to be broken for this to occur. The Charred Council themselves set this in place to halt the ongoing war between the demons and angels so that the kingdom of man can grow and feasibly survive the onslaught. War is being punished for moving without the call, maybe even causing the war itself to start far too early. Since we see everything through War's eyes, we know that's not the case. War is written in a way where whatever he sees is what we see. He may know more background knowledge on certain things like items and stuff, but he's completely truthful to us, the players. Because of this, we know that he's innocent and is being framed. War is then sent back to Earth to prove his innocence, or die trying. As the game goes on, War succeeds, slays the Destroyer, and the final seal is broken, thus summoning the other 3 horsemen to Earth. Here's where things get interesting. The ending of Darksiders 1 is the current latest point in the whole story. That means all the games don't go past that point whatsoever. That's right, Darksiders 2 may be a sequel in terms of being the game to come after, but it's not a sequel in terms of the timeline for the story. You see, Darksiders 2 actually takes place alongside the first game. When War was defeated and sent back to the Charred Council, just before starting his new quest to prove his innocence, a long time passed. During that time, the other horsemen are on their own quests. It's why you don't see all 4 of them together. The whole start of the apocalypse thing is so significant. They all have to clean up after whoever decided to go against the rules of the seals. It's just that their various quests take place in different locations from each other. While War was sent on a quest to prove his innocence, we later find out that it was a charade all along and the Charred Council set him up and accused him, knowing he did nothing wrong. At the same time, humanity is almost all gone. Since the seals were put in place to hold off the war long enough for humanity to grow enough to be a third faction in this battle, this was set far too early before they were actually ready. So Death was given the quest to find out how to resurrect humanity in an effort to erase the crime War was accused of. On this quest, Death travels to a lot of different locations other than just Earth. While most of War's quest takes place on Earth, Vigil Games decided to let Death go to different realms entirely. The fantastic part about this is how showing us these different locations really helped in fleshing out the universe more. There's more characters, more lore, more types of enemies, and so on. If the whole story and setting of the first game caught your attention, Darksiders 2 doubled down on that aspect and really let loose, going so far to show 4 different zones that aren't Earth in the main quest. This is both great and a bit disappointing. It's great because that's a lot more variety in the different types of locales you get to see, and it adds more to the universe with new characters you didn't know existed. It's disappointing because after the first 2 zones, the latter 2 are basically straight lines with no deviations. Another way to look at the later zones would be the devs trying to speed up the pacing of the story. While that could have been the case, there's still straight lines to your destination. One of my favorite parts of the beginning of the game is just how much like an early game RPG the first zone feels. Lush grass, clear skies, low-level enemies, and a literal demon wall blocking you from progressing further. I'm a bit of a sucker for this aesthetic as I enjoy MMOs and isekai anime. I am what some would call a weeb. The first zone has some variances in design. There's an area that has a lot of fire and lava, and even another area that's covered in snow. Sprinkle in some random side dungeons and puzzles that you can come across, and it's really well designed. Once you're done with the main story in this location, you move on to the Land of the Dead. It's every bit as dreary and depressing as you might think. Follow that up with a holy angel looking place, and then literal hell itself. This game has all the makings of that isekai MMO that you could ever want, starting in a nice low-level zone and working your way up to the Demon King or something. As I said before though, the latter two zones are basically straight lines. It's pretty much impossible to get lost in them. They basically just push you over to their big puzzle dungeons immediately, which at that point in the story, some players may want. On that note, the story is both long and doesn't feel like it overstays its welcome. Death's quest is to figure out how to resurrect humanity to erase his brother War's supposed crime. How does he start this quest? By killing his brother War. Oh wait, I mean by taking out some guy named the Crowfather. The Crowfather is someone we meet, has a history with Death himself, a mysterious glowing amulet, and some of the answers that Death seeks. Answers such as, how to even begin? A little back and forth dialogue, and then the Crowfather takes the form of War, and my god, that music! Since Death is so awesome though, he doesn't even flinch and takes the Crowfather out. Then he gets hit in the chest by that broken glowy amulet thing and falls unconscious through a portal. This is when Death ends up in the first actual zone of the game. The previous frozen planet was just a tutorial dungeon all along. It's here, in the Forge Lands, that we meet more makers. The same Scottish accented people like Ulthane in the first Darksiders game. Big, muscular, beats Death with a single blow. You know the people. It's here that Death also finds out something much darker is going on in the background. Something is infesting everywhere, and it's called corruption. It has some ties to Death himself that even he didn't know. That's just a small taste of the overall story to Darksiders 2. The game is both vibrant and dull in color usage, and is completely based around what location you're in. The variety is definitely welcome. When it comes to the gameplay, it takes everything that made Darksiders 1 great and adds more to the formula. Darksiders 1 gave War gear, puzzles, bosses, combat, and dungeons to wade through. Darksiders 2 has all of those things as well. In Darksiders 2, Death gets access to things like one of his brother Strife's pistols, an ethereal claw to grab objects or even move Death closer, a portal beam, the ability to split himself between two selves, and even his horse Despair. Get it? Death and Despair? I mean, what's one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse without their horse? Death's arsenal is pretty vast. He has his absolutely awesome dual sides as his quick primary weaponry. There are secondary weapons, and this is one of the main areas where Darksiders 2 splits from his predecessor. Enemies, chests, quests, and breakable objects can drop various types of gear in them, from the dual scythes to a vast amount of secondary weapons like hammers and fist weapons to that of armor. Not only that, but all of these weapons and armor have stats on them. That's right, there are RPG elements in Darksiders 2. This is an aspect about the game that I absolutely love. Death can also level up by getting enough experience points through both combat and quests. There are plenty of quests to do this as well. A lot of the side quests are there to help you get more gear and level up. They do have some odd amounts of lore written into them as well, but that varies. There are even different quality types for the various weapons and armor in the game. You can see what they are based on the border around the item. It works pretty standard and is easy to understand. The weapons can also have different stats and abilities that they come with. Things like a higher crit chance, or maybe some fire damage, and so on. But the interesting weapons come in the form of possessed weaponry. Don't worry, they're not actually possessed. They're just another grade of weapon with a twist. What's that twist, you ask? I'm glad you asked. You can level them up by sacrificing weapons and armor you don't plan on using into them. What happens every level is the base stats of the weapon go up, and you get to pick a random bonus stat to put onto them. These weapons are pretty good overall, and always worth leveling up. You essentially get to make a sort of custom weapon as you make it stronger. While normal weapons may have abilities they drop with, possessed weapons are customizable to an extent. That, and they can be any weapon type, from the dual scythes to that of all the various secondary weapons. When it comes to the combat, it follows Darksiders 1 in that regard. You have your standard combos, delayed combos, secondary weapons, wrath abilities, and equipment. Death has 3 dodges he can do, and they may or may not help you move faster than just walking everywhere. Not 100% certain on that, just feels like he moves faster. So naturally, I did it pretty much everywhere. That aside, the combat is really fun. It's a hack and slash style that uses different skills and abilities. It's all dependent on how you decide to tackle the game itself. With the dual sides, Death has a normal combo, but he can also add in some delayed attacks that change up the rest of the combo. Some are heavier damage dealing than others, and one is great at hitting multiple enemies around you. While Death starts out with one of these delayed combos, you can purchase the ability to use the others when you meet the warrior Thane, not to be mistaken with Ulthane. When you meet Thane, you'll see him striking his axe on some training dummies. He's definitely a warrior. Why not challenge him?
Come on! Show me what you've got!
Oh, I lost in a single hit. Well, there's a fix for that. It's called leveling up and coming back later. If this was Darksiders 1, it would 100% be a skill issue. However, when it comes to Darksiders 2 here, you have both leveling and stats that can increase. It's still a skill issue, but one where you might be able to take more than one hit when you come back later. Believe it or not, but that's not a joke. You can indeed beat the game without focusing on surviving more than one hit. You can straight up bum rush the story, not get any new gear equipped, and take on all the enemies you can. I would definitely argue it's possible to do a no-hit run on this game if you're skilled enough, something I definitely couldn't achieve myself. The combat is very fast-paced and chaotic in nature. You can have a tough time fighting one enemy, or even fighting a group of smaller enemies. The game can throw you a combination of both of those if need be. While you can be completely swarmed by a variety of enemies, it doesn't appear that you'll get attacked much by enemies you don't see on your screen. This doesn't mean that you won't, it's just that it's less likely. They seem to take turns on who's attacking. If an enemy is behind you, but still visible on the screen, they'll still wind up their attacks. Having the enemies take turns and not attacking you all at once will definitely make combat a bit more manageable. You won't have to worry about getting absolutely curb stomped by everything swinging all at once. If you feel confident in your ability to play the game, you can also test yourself in something called the Crucible. It's a wave-based mode that has you taking on a large swath of different enemies, sometimes even combined. Enemies that you may have had a tough time on before may show up. You may also have to fight more than one of them. It's definitely there to bring the challenge. The rules are simple. Make it through as many waves as you can, and you'll be rewarded accordingly for doing a marathon. You are asked every 5 waves if you want to call it there or continue on. If you die at all during your run, you get nothing. By the way, there are 101 waves. The reason why it's not a straight 100 is because you get one final secret boss at the very end. While there are 101 waves, you unlock them in batches of 25 each, though I think wave 101 is batched in with 75 through 100. You'll get these unlocked as you progress the game. However, I do want to mention that you can't actually do waves 75 through 101 on your first playthrough of the game. Darksiders 2 comes with a New Game Plus feature. After you hit that, you get to carry over pretty much everything, from your level, to gear, to stats. You're just going through the story again. Once you hit New Game Plus, you can finally head in and do waves 75 through 101. As you complete this giant gauntlet, you get more and more rewards. It's pretty recommended to be max level with the best gear you can equip. Max level in Darksiders 2 is 30. You can see what level an individual enemy is simply by locking onto them. It's right next to the health bar right above their head. If you wanted to make the game harder, you can definitely do that by changing the difficulty. The various difficulty levels are as follows: easy, normal, apocalyptic, and if you have the definitive edition, definitive. There's also nightmare mode that you can put on. While you can select a new difficulty with New Game Plus, you can't select nightmare mode unless it's a 100% new game. You start off in apocalyptic difficulty. Death only has 1 life. If you die 1 time, your save is completely wiped. This option only unlocks after completing the game once, so don't worry about accidentally starting it or something on your first playthrough. There are some really tough bosses out there that are clearly designed to be taken on later. I accidentally came across a boss named Gorewood early on in my playthrough. He's a boss that's not part of the main story. He could one-shot me and had an attack that was pretty hard to avoid. I came back every now and then to challenge him again. The one time that I beat him, turns out I was still underleveled because his weapon was a higher level than I was. So I'll take that victory. One of the more fun aspects to the combat system is mixing up your attacks between your normal dual sides and your secondary weapons. Depending on what the secondary weapon is, it can really complement the dual sides on certain enemies and bosses. Speaking of bosses, there are a lot of them in Darksiders 2, and boy oh boy, do they bring some challenge with them. Not all of them. I did get past a couple bosses without taking so much as a single hit. Others though, they could straight up ruin your day or just add in a lot of extra time. Some bosses even have mechanics tied to them. You might come across a boss that has health gates. Deal enough damage and you might need to do something else to open them up for more punishment. How can you get more Legend of Zelda inspired than that? Executions are still here, and they're not as focused on as they were in Darksiders 1. Some of the weapons you get can raise the chances of executions popping up for you, so you can get it closer to the original. But even with that, the combat still feels fantastic. You can feel the impact on the enemies. Everything feels so visceral, and I love it. One of the things that makes Death a force to be reckoned with is his Reaper form. Just like War's Chaos form, Death has his Reaper form. The only difference is that Death can actually take damage while in this form, though he does use the form a lot when you beat bosses and enemies. The Reaper form has a time limit set to it, so you can't use it indefinitely. Even with that, it's not like you'll need it for everything anyway. I only ended up using it a couple times in my playthrough because I liked sticking to Death's normal attacks. I have no doubt that people use the form more liberally in higher difficulties as well. I played the game on normal, so while it was a challenge, it's not like it was the hardest thing in the world. Traversal in the world is involved with the puzzles as well as a few other obstacles. Much like War, Death can climb and jump around as well. Death can also wall run as well as jumping between two different walls to get higher. And thankfully, the devs decided to put in a dedicated button to let Death jump backward from what he's clinging onto. Gone are the days of hoping your analog stick is pointed in the correct direction only to end up off a ledge. Let's talk about the puzzles next. Something that Darksiders 1 did really well was its puzzles and how it incorporated them into traversal through the game and dungeons. This is something that clearly took inspiration from the Legend of Zelda series. While Darksiders 1 did it fantastically, I can say that Darksiders 2 is just as good in the puzzle department. You'll come across some puzzles that may stump you for a little bit. It really forced me to think outside of the box a few times. I may have had an idea of what to do, tried it out, and it didn't pan out the way I wanted it to. But then I would have that eureka moment where it all just clicked into place and made sense. After all, a broken clock is right twice a day. The overall formula when it comes to puzzles is locking you in a room, sometimes with enemies, sometimes with puzzles, sometimes with both. It honestly feels like a great sprinkling of enemies throughout. Nothing too overwhelming, and you have plenty of time to work on solving the puzzles. What's an action game without the occasional enemy to spice things up during your thinking time? This is actually the third time I've played Darksiders 2. The first two times, something always came up that prevented me from finishing the game. But from memory, there was this one puzzle that I had a tough time with on my first two attempts. It was during one of the main quest dungeons. I had to work on getting a giant ball past a certain gate. It drove me insane with how I kept missing some obvious solution. This time, even with a significant break between my last attempt and now, I figured the puzzle out much faster than I would have thought. It's things like that that end up being such a fun part of the game. Add in the really fast and fluid combat system, the large variety of enemies, and all the different locations, and you've got yourself a great game. There are also 3 DLC in the game. If you own them, you just need to select them from your menu after selecting your save file. They're not really groundbreaking in any regard. They're all bite-sized pieces of content. You can finish each one around an hour or so in. They're basically just extra content with a bit of extra world building attached. Each one has its own shtick. They model their puzzles around different gear from Death. All 3 unlock after you pass certain main story points. My favorite is the Demon Lord Belial. It comes with a tough boss and interesting story bits. Moving on, I want to talk about the story here, so if you want to stay spoiler free, be sure to head to the timestamp displayed on the screen now. With that out of the way, let's head right in. Darksiders 2 starts with Death heading to the Crowfather to find out where to start his quest. The quest, as I stated earlier, is to resurrect humanity from extinction to erase his brother's supposed crime. Death is shown a portal to something called the Tree of Life, apparently where his quest should start, but the Crowfather closes the portal before Death walks through. The Crowfather has this amulet that apparently houses all of the souls of a race called the Nephilim, the very same race all the horsemen hail from. It's driving him mad and he doesn't want it anymore and wants Death to take it back. Death declines and wants to further his quest. Naturally, things don't go quite as Death would hope, and the Crowfather decides to fight back. After fighting the Crowfather, who basically set himself up as an illusion of war, Death ends his life, but not before being sucked into a portal where he ends up in a Maker's Realm in a location called the Forge Lands. This is the setup to the main quest. We know what Death's goal is, and where he needs to go to achieve it. Naturally, things don't always go so easily. It's in the Forge Lands we find out about this stuff called corruption that Death has to contend with. It's ever expanding, and if left unchecked, will eventually consume everything. The way to the Tree of Life is blocked by this gigantic demon wall thing made of corruption. The Forge Lands are pretty big and have different directions that Death has to go in to get past the wall. You know, even though he could probably fly over it in his Reaper form. The makers here offer their help in getting Death past the wall, so long as he helps them out as well. Death turns on a forge and goes to awaken a giant construct called the Guardian. Naturally, this construct is corrupted, so Death needs to take it out. Mission complete. Wall still in the way. Oh, the old maker is sacrificing himself to bring the Guardian back to life. Is this what happens when you pit an unstoppable force up against an immovable object? Now that the wall is gone, it's time to complete the quest. Nope, Death is just taken through some corruption goop to the land of the dead. Going through the fairly large zone, Death finds the guy who runs the place. He wants his men back, so Death has to go collect them. After bringing in all three of them, they die. In the afterlife. How does that work? Then Death goes forward and finds the Crowfather again. You know, the guy he killed in the beginning of the game. Now he seems more receptive to Death's quest and tells him where to go again. Death needs 2 keys to get to something called the Well of Souls. One in the realm of the angels, the other with the demons. It's off to the land of the angels. After not getting lost due to only a straight path forward, Death comes across the Archon. The Archon tasks Death with going to Earth to get some sort of Rod of Arafel. Death goes to Earth, finds Uriel from the Hellguard in the first game, helps them out, collects all 3 pieces of the rod, reforges it, and heads back to the Archon. It's then that the Archon opens a path to the key.
I will burn away the shadows with holy light.
After puzzling and slaughtering his way to victory, Death finally finds the guy who has the key. After a hard fight, Death finally defeats the Archon and gets the key. Now onward to the land of the demons. Death finds a new ability to time travel from his mother Lilith, finds the demon Samael in the past, fights him, and gets the key. Now with everything in hand, Death goes to the Well of Souls. He fights his brother Absalom, who is the source of the corruption, beats him, and then dives headfirst into the well. He does this to sacrifice the souls of all the Nephilim to resurrect humanity. Roll credits. It may look like Death is, well, dead, but once the 7th seal is broken, he's back alive and well. And thus ends the story summary. All in all, the gameplay is great. The art style is fantastic, the enemy design is incredible, the music is phenomenal, and the story is pretty good. It's mainly the universe of Darksiders that's just so awesome to me. I love how gruesome the world is, how fantasy, apocalyptic, and grandiose it is. The Darksiders universe is very interesting, and I love seeing more in this fabled place. As for my title statement of Darksiders 2 being the perfect sequel, I stand by that. You see, it took everything that made Darksiders 1 great and put it into here. It used the previous game to great effect, and added more on top of it. It just felt bigger than the first in a variety of ways. Not to mention, Death is a badass just like his brother War. Death may not have come across the Destroyer himself, but the amount of challenges he had to overcome is nothing to scoff at. Darksiders 1 showed you War at his peak of power at the beginning, and depowered him really quickly. It showed you what he was capable of, and it made narrative sense as to why he was depowered. Death, on the other hand, isn't depowered in any way. The way they work around that whole concept is a strength in Darksiders 2. It wouldn't make much sense to have the same thing happen to Death just to have him feel like he's regaining his strength just like War did. Instead, they added in RPG elements. Narratively, Death is just as strong as he always is. Gameplay-wise, you get stronger with leveling up and getting better gear. It still gives the player the feeling of progression while simultaneously not pulling the same depowered shtick like they did in the first game. It feels like a natural way to progress the Darksiders games without falling back on old tropes. The character writing is also a highlight. There's a lot of unique characters that have their own goals and personalities. You can easily tell all of them from one another. The various makers, to the Lord of the Dead, to the Archon, and even Samael. Everything in this universe is dark and gritty. It feels very interesting, and there's 2 more horsemen to play as. The remaining two horsemen are Fury and Strife. While Fury has Darksiders 3, Strife has yet to have his own game. There is a spin-off game called Darksiders Genesis, but it's not Darksiders 4. I really want to see what's in the future of the series. Based off the current game formula, we're likely going to be getting Darksiders 4 with Strife, and then a Darksiders 5 which will take place after the end of Darksiders 1. As of the moment of making this video, Darksiders 4 has yet to be announced. There's a potential tease to it being a thing in the future, but nothing is set in stone yet. I love the Darksiders franchise, and I want to see this saga to its end. It would be a real shame if it ended before being finished. Hopefully, we get some positive news about it soon. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you liked the video. The next game I'll be looking at in this franchise will be that of Darksiders 3 with Fury. Looking forward to hopping back in. With that said, my name is MegaMadVlad, and I hope you all have a great day. Adios.